Jennifer Sertl from Studio A3R. I first want to thank Anthony Molina for that amazing music that begins our day. As you know, Studio A3R is just about 4 questions. Where have you been? Where are you going? What have you learned? What's required? Although I think I got the order messed up on that. But so where have you been? What have you learned? Where are you going? And finally, what is required? Today I'm actually in Rochester, New York at ROC Vox Studio with Scott Fitzgerald, who is our producer. Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm just popping on here for the hello to everyone. And you know, it's okay if you get those questions wrong, if you get them in the wrong order. I know that it's important that you put them in the right order for your show, but we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. I'm just in the back room here in my control room, sort of pushing buttons and turning knobs and making sure that everything goes right with your show. And I'm honored that you have chosen me for Studio A3R. Thank you so much.
Is there anything exciting going on in some of your projects? I would love to make sure that we're up to date with what you're working on.
Got a lot of new podcasts recording here, a lot of video podcasts and audio books and e-learning for voiceover for e-learning. So yeah, busy time. And we're thankful because a lot of small businesses like us are not doing as well because of the pandemic. So we've been thankfully we do things kind of in the virtual realm. So we lucked out there.
You're ahead of the curve always. And if there's anything that happens today through Peter, you just feel inspired, feel free to pop into the conversation. And with that, I am very lucky to introduce Peter Vander Auwera from Brussels today. I don't know even what to call him. He's a sense maker. He's an experienced producer. He's a thought leader, and he's an artist. So welcome from Brussels this afternoon, Peter. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
It's
hot in Brussels. We are close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit today.
Oh my gosh.
Which is quite exceptional.
And is it humid as well? We're at, I think, 93 degrees with humidity, which is the frizzy hair, you know?
Uh-huh. It's humid as well and no airco.
Oh. Okay. Well, you're not melting on the screen here, which is really fascinating. I would love just to kind of hear, where have you been, Peter?
I interpreted the question as not from a physical location point of view. Okay. So I've been a little bit everywhere, but let me start when I was 6 years old or something like that. When I was sitting in first grade and I was called to the whiteboard or the blackboard. At that time, for the very first time in my life, I could go to the front of the room and we were learning to write letters, A, B, C, D, and so on. And so the teacher asked us to nicely write the letters on the blackboard. And I started drawing spirals, really huge spirals on the blackboard. And I got punished for it because that was not the assignment. And so I'm going to come back on that, on what you have learned, because I think I would invite everybody to look at what was forbidden when they were young. It's a very dangerous question, by the way, what is forbidden or what was forbidden. But I invite everybody to ask themselves the question, what was forbidden when you were 6 or 7 or 8 or 10? Because I believe there is something there, one of your superpowers, that didn't get the chance to be developed at that time. So I think for me, it had something to do with spirals, with drawing. I'll skip forward. I went to architecture school. Real architecture, like designing buildings. But it was an artistic school. So we were allowed to design buildings that never had to be built, which gives you a lot of freedom, of course. But I ended up as a dropout. So I went till 4th year and then I dropped out because it was too much legal stuff and so on and so on. And so I ended up with a career in tech, if I can summarize it like that, with jobs at Microsoft and then at Swift. And that's where we met, where I was one of the co-founders of InnoTribe, a tribe of innovators in the financial industry. And that's how I ended up in my main expertise at the time, which was to curate and design and think about live events. How would you do that in a way that goes beyond a speaker on a stage delivering a message to a passive audience? So it was a lot about experimenting with the immersive learning experiences. Started as a fringe event, evolved as something that went really center stage. In the end, a very high-end production with lots of visuals and sound and even smell to create immersive experiences. And it was in 2016 that I decided to take a sabbatical for many, many different reasons. I went back to art academy, painting. And I started doing a number of things that I always wanted to do in the context of InnoTribe or outside of the context of InnoTribe. So I did a performance. That was the idea, was to deliver a talk, a keynote, but to illustrate the story only with my own artwork from a visual point of view, and only with my self-composed soundscapes, and only with my self-written poetry, and to bring it live, which in the end I did with costumes and masks and live music and light scripting and all that sort of things. So that was 2016, and more or less around the same period. I mean, maybe it was 2015, doesn't matter so much. I had forced myself to go to exhibitions, art exhibitions, and usually of artists or forms of art that I was absolutely not familiar with. So I went to an exhibition, a fashion exhibition, and as you can see, I'm absolutely not in fashion, but I went to a fashion exhibition of the Belgian designer Dries van Noten, who had his 20th year retrospective, something, in Antwerp. And I was struck by beauty. It really came in very, very deep. And I think it's at that moment that I made like the switch that I wanted to do something else with my life and my career, and give it a much bigger part, much more attention to art and my expression in art. And so I've started doing all sorts of things, from painting to soundscapes to poetry to sculpture to video to artificial reality, going all over the place. So I think I'm attracted by, if I think about Dries van Noten, who is, by the way, one of my heroes, I'm attracted by elegance, by his dedication to the job. I mean, they have to produce 4 full-blown collections per year. I mean, that's a big thing. And sheer beauty. Where am I now and what have I learned? So let me put a bit into context what I'm going to say about where I am now. During my Swift period, I started blogging, and I made a set of blogs about archetypes of change agents. So I was part of an innovation team, and I started reflecting about what change agents are doing. And I defined 12 archetypes, which I broke up in 3 categories. One category, the first phase, is the forbidden. The second phase is the protest. And the third phase is the creation phase. So I was one of the initiators of Corporate Rebels United, which was and still is a movement to unite change agents worldwide, cross industries. And at a certain moment, I think it was MJ from Portland, during a call, he said to me, Peter, I think you have exhausted the archetype of rebel. Yeah? So I invite you to have a look at this book. And the book was about archetypes in branding, which is just a very nice updated book on the archetypes of Carl Jung. And so he invited me to look at the other archetypes that resonate with you. And I was really attracted to the archetype of artist and the sub-archetype of creator. And it's like at that moment that I realized, so you come from this place where you were at the whiteboard or the blackboard at school at 6, and you were forbidden to draw spirals, and you went to architecture. And I remember an anecdote where my teacher, my professor, he basically destroyed a model of a building that I had made, where I spent like 3 nights on it. And then the morning of the presentation, he really literally shot it in pieces apart. And now I can put it all in context, but that was the forbidden, or the, in architecture especially, this getting used to critique, but critique in the sense that is used in architectural studios, where people give each other honest feedback, very straightforward feedback, but not with the intention to hurt you, but really to make us better as a team. So it's a group of students that, in their full vulnerability in building new stuff, they are prepared to accept each other's critique, each other's feedback. So I have put this anecdote of the architecture school into that critique context. And so I landed in more this creation paradigm, which was also inspired by a book by, I think it was Robert Fritz, who wrote a book called The Path of Least Resistance. There are, by the way, 2 versions of that book, one for artists and one for business. But I think the prime storyline of The Path of Least Resistance is that there is a big difference between the artistic orientation and the problem-solving orientation that you have mainly in business. And so part of where I have been as part of the InnoTribe experience, we had like an annual worldwide startup competition, and we were training the startups to deliver a professional pitch. And we trained them to use 10 slides to get their story into 10 slides. And the first slide had to be, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And then the next slide is, this is the solution. And the next slide is the team, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So with hindsight, I think that's a very limiting question. What problem are you trying to solve? The more interesting question, I think, is, what are you trying to create?
Mm-hmm.
Also to bring it back into the creator's perspective. And that's the eyes that Robert Fritz opened for me, is that those are fundamentally 2 different orientations. So like the artist, she knows what she wants to create. Yeah? And then she develops mastery with the tools the pens, the canvas and the brushes and the paint to create what she wants,
Right.
which is a completely different mindset than what problem are you trying to solve? Obviously, the artist is also solving problems which
Right.
are more of a tactical nature. But
Can I would like to interject just a bit. So I now, as a guest speaker for InnoTribe, with John Hagel and Mark Pesch and Michelle Bowens, and the most interesting thing of now realizing that I actually was a color of paint in a painting, right, was that as a thought leader, we're invited on a stage, and we think that we were invited because of our intelligence. And on the stage that you invited us on, we were actually told not to talk about what we were an expert on. You actually brought us all together and then asked a new question and had us perform a new question on stage. So I can say, like, as an experiencer of it, I would have. It's neat to know now that you were both an architect in how you use the stage, and then also an artist in terms of how you use the people like color. So I just want to say I'm experiencing. Oh, that's what you were doing. Because it's a hard thing as a thought leader to surrender your expertise for someone else's model when you're given a world stage like we were given. So it was really a humbling. I'm a better leader now because I was on the InnoTribe stage, but it was hard for me at that time not really knowing what was really going on.
mm-hmm. And when we were the last show that I produced as designer of InnoTribe at Cybos was in 2016, was in Geneva.
Yes, it was beautiful. That stage was gorgeous.
Yes. So I think that was one of the best ones I did, and I wanted to go further than that. Yeah. So I think it's at that edition or the year before that I started realizing what I'm doing is trying to resonate with the audience at a level beyond the cognitive.
Right.
So I'm not excluding the cognitive, so the transfer of knowledge that comes in between your ears, but I wanted to resonate with the audience at the subconscious level.
Right.
And I started realizing that to do that, you have to use other senses than just somebody talking or somebody showing an image. And that's where I started speculating on what would happen if I start mixing in artists into the mix, but not as entertainment, but in support of the content. So there was already a little bit of that in Geneva, where we asked artists to create content in function, to create artistic interventions in function of the content of the show. And so post Swift, I started as a freelancer, but really like a 50% what I call work, 50% work and 50% just doing my art. And when I say work, I hope I can continue to say that for me, work is paid play.
Scott, you get that? I love that. Work is paid play.
Yeah, I mean, that's the ideal place to be. And I'm very conscious that not everybody is in that position.
Can I just think, so for our listeners, there have been about 8 references that I'll make sure as I write a blog about this series that all of the references that Peter's given and all the great books are part of it. And I think in this moment, particularly in the United States, I think a lot of people are in the process of rebuilding. They're in the grief process, right? Because there's a lot that they thought the future would look different, and we really truly don't know what's going to happen. But I feel that as you listen to Peter's talk, I hope and hear, when you hear play, is just something about your youth and what you were doing before you actually knew you were on a public stage might be a clue to how you rebuild your life in a new business and maybe even your own business, because many people are actually losing their jobs right now, Peter, in the United States. So I'm just wanting to put this layer in this conversation around, please hear hope, and that many of the answers you're looking for may not be found in like what you're reading, but it might be found in actually investigating your own life journey. Is that a fair statement, Peter?
It is, and if you allow me, I'm going to come back on a number of those things.
Perfect.
Like the word expert into something. It's probably what you, in this strange period, it's what you don't need to be an expert. You better avoid to be an expert in today's world.
It's unfortunate, but true.
Yeah. So my paid play, the sort of things I'm doing is like last year, I was invited to work for a pretty big Fortune 500 company to help them design, let's call it a leadership offsite. Yeah. But the theme that the client wanted us to develop was ambiguity, uncertainty, which was pre-COVID period. So we took their team of 16 high potentials for a week around ambiguity. We took them to Shenzhen in China for a week. And the participants, they did not know what the program was. So the only thing they knew was that there was a bus picking them up at the hotel at 2 p.m. on Monday and another bus dropping them at the airport on Friday. But no clue what is the program, the content, who is going to be there, and so on. So it's a place where, I mean, with a supporting team, we started experimenting with artists in support of content. So we had a musician with us. It's a Belgian musician, Ozark Henry, who had become by accident almost one of the top 5 world experts in 360-degree sound. So we hired in Shenzhen a 360-degree sound system. And so the 16 participants were sitting in this special designed room, 360-degree sound, where we used sound as a way to resonate with the audience at a level beyond the cognitive. And so the topic of ambiguity and uncertainty, because the client allowed me to really develop the whole concept. I really got the time to do it. It's like fruit. Fruit is really tasteful if you harvest it at the right time. So if it's too early, it's sour, and if it's too late, it's rotten. But it needs the time it needs to mature. Yeah? So the client allowed me to mature the concept. And I got really fascinated by the topic of ambiguity and uncertainty. And a lot of the people on this show, they are probably familiar with the term VUCA, which stands for velocity, ambiguity, complexity, and ambiguity, which is, by the way, a term that already goes back 40 years. It started like many things, in the military. But today, especially in this during, post, etc. COVID period, everything is VUCA. Everything is VUCA. It's not a differentiating factor anymore.
Can you say that
everything is VUCA?
The 4 words again, just because I think that for many people this will be the first time they hear that term.
Okay, so it's V of velocity, U from I have to probably, Scott can edit this. I lost track, so let me type in VUCA to get it 100% right. VUCA, the VUCA world, volatility. Sorry, the V of volatility.
Okay.
The U of uncertainty, the C of complexity, and the A of ambiguity.
Wow, that's such a beautiful, and I think that there's so much in this conversation. I think part of it is how to scale it with people that are not as well read or as an experience. So that That's a powerful, powerful thing. And I think you wrote a blog about this too, so I can include that link as well.
Yes, please. And I bumped into already 2 years ago, but I refreshed, renewed the contact with a gentleman from the Institute for the Future, Jamais Casio,
Yeah.
who coined another term, BANI, B-A-N-I, where the B stands for brittleness, the A for ambiguity, for anxiousness, the N for nonlinear, and the I for incomprehensible. And I think Bani exactly describes what we are in now.
Wow.
It's a brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible state of the world.
Right. Just pause, breathe, take some water, Scott. I'm having to take some time to process this. It's so exciting to have new language for a new world. I think many times the words that we've had haven't been insufficient. And so what I really, really appreciate, Peter, is the way in which you're actually giving us a new vocabulary to be realistic about the truth about the world. The old worlds will not help us, but these new worlds will. These new words will for a new world. So thank you for taking the time.
Sure. And Jamais, he also, and I think I can share, of course, a blog post that he made as part of an interview as part of another podcast series. He coined another term. What is happening after Bani if we don't get it right? And so after Bani, it's STEM, but not the STEM that we know, but is the STEM with the S of shattered, the T of terror, the E of entropy, and the M of meaninglessness. It's definitely not where we want to go, but if we don't get it right, that's the sort of world we will end up with. So it's a very nice evolution from VUCA to Bani, and if we don't get it right, to STEM. And the more interesting part, I think, besides using a new language to articulate what is now, the more interesting part is to start reflecting on what are our possible responses to Bani. So Jamais also started doing that. And in conversation with him, we developed this concept of responses. So the response to the B of brittleness, and that will certainly resonate with you, Jennifer, is resilience. Yes. The response to anxiousness that's a difficult one. It's agency through imagination. The response to nonlinear is flux mindset. And the response to incomprehensibility is pause and improvisation.
Wow. I feel that just from the content here, Peter, it's like, wow, this is amazing. Can I just ask you just real quickly to talk about what's required? How are you having to change? I wanted to ask, how are you having to change for what's required? And then I wondered if you could maybe end with a piece of poetry. I haven't asked you about this for prep, but all of a sudden I got the sense of, after all of these words, I feel the need for poetry. Personally, I feel the need for poetry. So I would love to ask, and we can certainly have you as a guest again, because I feel like we're just, there's these layers and spirals, if you will, and I'm like, wow. But I'm wanting to know, like, how have you had to change yourself with these, for preparation for this? And then could you please end with a bit of poetry?
I think the way how I have or wanted to change, or what is needed to get at where I want to be, is I need a plan. To put it in simple words, I need a plan and I need discipline in execution. sounds very simple. If you allow me to quickly further develop this Bani, etc. concept and the possible responses, by talking and getting introduced to other people, I discovered the work of John C. Brown and Ann Pendleton in a fantastic book, 2 volumes book called Design Unbound. And it's unbound from thingness. So Ann Pendleton is an architect. So we are closing the loop here. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
So she still is a practicing architect designing buildings, but she started using architectural studio practices, not only to build buildings, but to build systems of action.
Wow.
Yeah. So when I'm using the word plan, I mean, I have articulated a system of action, which is a way to get things moving, not only with myself, but also what I want the ecosystem to emerge. Because the big learning for me in her work is that you can design for emergence. You don't have to wait until something suddenly by accident sticks on the wall.
Right, right.
You can design for emergence, for the sort of behavior that you would like to emerge from a certain structure. But then you have to execute it.
Right, right.
Fully disciplined.
Right.
So besides of that, what I need if I continue splitting up my activity into 2 parts, being art and work, for art, I have to be disciplined in developing a portfolio because I'm not known in the art world. So if I want to have an influence, a reputation, or social capital, sometimes called in the art world, I have to produce. I have to show a portfolio of what is possible. If I look at my work, my paid play activities, that's where I need, obviously, clients, but mainly I call it shared time or air time or feedback time or critique time in the architectural studio sense. So, and I'm forcing myself to have regular calls with people who are in my network or people outside of my network to learn new things and to get feedback. Because every time I share what I just shared with you, somebody else adds something new to it or says that's a weaker part, or it's getting better. The more you share, the better it gets.
Right. One of the things I love about you, Peter, is that you're very generous and always, your blog posts have always included almost everything you've written and anyone you've talked to. There's an entire history of, if you think of an individuation of ideas, there's the entire branches of trees of thoughts, and I really appreciate how thoughtful you've been in that. And I also with John Steely Brown and I think John Hagel wrote The Power of Pull, right? Mm-hmm. So when you first were talking about what was required, it almost sounded like a linear answer, but the answer that you gave was 4D. It was a dimensional. You're having to build the future that you want, and then you have to execute within that future that you've imagined. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes.
Yeah, and amazing. So as there are change makers, and then there are light bearers, and I think of you as a light bearer. You go to the future before we get there, and then you create a trail of breadcrumbs that allow us to go and maybe make different inferences. So it's not projecting where we need to go, but you're inviting people. And the 2 questions that I think will are so powerful that I hope everyone gets are: what was forbidden, and then what do you want to create? And the third question that I heard from Peter was, where do you find beauty? So I think of 3 questions that the answers you've given us have given us new questions. I think those are the three that I think I'm going to have a year-long sleep cycle on those three questions, which is great. I wish we had more time. Can we please close with just a piece of poetry?
Sure. I'll take one of my poems, a short one. Oh, this is a very short one, 2 lines. Is that good enough?
That whatever feels right. Like I trust how the future uses you as an invitation. So however you've been invited.
Yeah. I'll take this a 2-line, very short poem, and it's called "The Book of Dreams." Oh, wow. And it goes as follows. I dreamt I was reading a book of dreams and forgot where and why I was. That's it.
I can't imagine a better way to. And are there ellipses after that? Does it end with a period or does it end with ellipsis?
No, there's nothing. Just was. There's not a full stop. Nothing.
Oh my gosh. Robert Bly, we have a rival here. We have just been taken on a very powerful existential journey with Peter Vander Auwera, a good friend and someone that inspires me continually. And I want to thank Scott Fitzgerald for producing our show. And with that, I look forward to our next episode of Studio A3R. Thank you, Peter.